Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive into all things biochar. Just like always, we're going through the most talked about stuff from biochar today. This week, we've got a pretty interesting mix. A kind of controversial article about biochar and carbon removal, some cool results from a vineyard trial, and a look at the International Biomass Conference and Expo coming up.
Sounds like we have a lot to cover.
Yeah, we do. So this first article is making some waves. It's by an environmental economist, Dr. Romain Pirard. He calls it, "Biochar is not a carbon dioxide removal, but it should be promoted regardless." Pretty strong statement right off the bat.
Definitely a bold claim, yeah. It kind of goes against what a lot of people think about biochar. But the interesting thing is Dr. Perard isn't saying biochar is useless. He's just questioning whether it should really be called carbon dioxide removal, or CDR, as it's often shortened to.
Why is that distinction so important? I think most folks would assume that turning biomass into biochar, automatically means you're taking carbon out of the atmosphere.
That's where this idea of additionality comes in. To be considered a real CDR, the carbon you're removing has to be like extra carbon that wouldn't have been removed otherwise. Dr. Perard argues that if you're using biomass that would have decomposed anyway, all you're really doing is changing when that carbon gets released, not actually removing extra carbon from the air.
Ah, okay. So using stuff like agricultural residues that would decompose naturally wouldn't really count as CDR.
Right.
But if you used a totally new source of biomass, maybe that would.
Exactly. And that matters because it affects how much biochar projects are worth and how they're funded. If we overestimate biochar's ability to remove carbon, we might end up wasting resources, putting money into projects that don't actually remove as much carbon as something else could.
Right.
Yeah,
Makes
okay.
sense. So what does Dr. Perard think we should do? Is he saying to give up on biochar entirely?
Oh, not at all. He's just saying that even if biochar doesn't always fit the definition of true CDR, it's still really useful for fighting climate change and adapting to it, especially when you consider how it can help with sustainable agriculture. Think of it more as a way to store carbon while also making the soil healthier.
Yeah, I get it. It's about being more accurate with what we say, not exaggerating how much biochar affects the amount of carbon in the atmosphere.
Exactly. And it's important for making good policy decisions, and figuring out how to spend money on climate solutions. It's about picking the right tools for the job and being sure that the solutions we're investing in actually do what we need them to do. What are your thoughts on this, listener? Does this change how you see biochar in a world trying to get to net zero emissions?
Well, let's move on to our next story, something a little more concrete.
Right. This one takes us to the vineyards of California. There was a 6-year study in Monterey County led by Josiah Hunt, and they found some pretty cool stuff. They were looking at how biochar and compost affect Pinot Noir grapevines. And the results were pretty impressive. The areas they treated with both biochar and compost had over 30% more grapes than the areas they didn't treat. That's a pretty big jump in how much they were producing.
And it wasn't just a tiny experiment either. This was on an 8-acre site, so it's not like you can just brush off the results.
And here's the really interesting part. They did an economic analysis, and it turns out that using both biochar and compost led to an extra, get this, 17,607 zutters per acre in revenue. That's after taking into account how much the biochar and compost cost.
Wow. So it's not just about more grapes, it's about more money for the vineyard owners, too. That's a pretty convincing reason to use biochar for growing grapes.
For sure. And it really shows how biochar has these practical, real-world benefits. It's not all about the theory of storing carbon. It can actually make a big difference in how much food we can grow and how profitable farming can be.
Yeah, I see that. So what's the secret behind this biochar and compost combo? What makes it work so well?
It's all about improving the soil. Biochar is like a sponge. It holds onto water and makes the soil less compact, which lets air in. It's also a good home for all kinds of helpful microbes. Compost adds nutrients and organic matter, which makes the soil even richer.
So together they create a sort of team effort that makes the plants healthier, gives you more grapes, and in the end, more money.
Right. And this brings up a really interesting question. Could we use this same approach for other crops, not just grapes? Researchers are definitely looking into that, and so far the results seem pretty promising.
It's pretty amazing to think about how much food we could grow if this worked for lots of different crops. It's a really cool area of research that could make agriculture more sustainable in the long run. Speaking of exciting stuff, let's talk about an event that's getting a lot of attention in the biochar world.
You mean the International Biomass Conference and Expo? That's definitely going to be a big deal for anyone interested in biochar and biomass energy in general.
It's huge. Over 30 panels, 100 speakers, 90 presentations.
Right.
And biochar is a major focus this year, which is awesome.
Yeah, there are 4 whole sessions just about biochar, covering everything from trends in the industry and market analysis to how to get funding for new projects. That much focus on biochar really shows how important it's becoming in the whole sustainability movement.
For sure, it's a sign that biochar is moving past those small-scale uses
Yeah.
and becoming a bigger player in how we create a more sustainable future. There's one session in particular that I think will be super helpful for anyone who wants to start a biochar
Are
business.
you thinking about the session called Accelerating Capital for Biochar Innovation?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the one. It's all about figuring out the world of investors and what they look for in a biochar project.
That's crucial because getting funding is often the hardest part for new companies, especially in fields like biochar that are still developing. Knowing what investors are looking for can be really valuable for people trying to get started in the biochar world.
Definitely. That session will give people the chance to learn about the different kinds of investors who are interested in biochar, what they look for when deciding whether to fund a project, and how to put together a really good pitch that gets them excited about your idea. If you're trying to get money for your biochar business, that session is a must-go.
And even if you're not looking for funding, there's so much to learn at this conference. I'm personally really interested in the technical considerations for biomass gasification as a low-risk pathway
Well,
session.
that one sounds interesting. What will they be talking about?
It's all about the technical details of biomass gasification, which is a process that can be used to make biochar and a bunch of other useful things like syngas, that's a mix of hydrogen and carbon monoxide, and bio-oil, which can be used as fuel.
So it's like getting multiple benefits out of biomass, with biochar being one of them.
Exactly. They'll be digging into the newest gasification technology, how it can help us create a more sustainable energy system, and what the challenges and opportunities are when you're trying to make these gasification projects bigger.
It's really cool to see how biochar is becoming part of these larger conversations about renewable energy and sustainable development.
Mm.
It's not just a niche solution anymore. It's a key part of this bigger shift towards a more circular and regenerative economy.
Totally. And the International Biomass Conference and Expo is a perfect example of how all these different ideas, innovations, and experts are coming together, all focused on finding ways to solve the biggest challenges facing our planet.
Yeah, it's like a sneak peek into what a sustainable future could look like, and biochar is playing a big role in making that happen.
And speaking of the future, there's another session I wanted to point out. It's called State of the Biochar Industry, Technology, Markets, and Commercialization Approaches.
Sounds like a must attend for anyone who wants to get the big picture of where the biochar industry is at right now.
Exactly. People attending will hear from experts who will break down the newest biochar technologies, where they can be used, and what the main drivers are for growth in the biochar market. It's a great opportunity to understand the trends that are shaping the biochar industry's future.
Sounds like there's something for everyone at this conference, whether you're a biochar pro just curious about it or an entrepreneur looking to make your mark in the sustainability world.
Absolutely. It's a unique opportunity to network, learn new stuff, and see what's new and cutting edge in biochar and biomass energy.
And here's a great bonus for biochar producers. You can attend the conference for free.
Yep. The organizers are really dedicated to helping the biochar industry grow and succeed. This really shows how much they believe in biochar's potential to contribute to a more sustainable world.
If you're even a little bit interested in what the future holds for biochar, this conference is an amazing chance to dive into the latest research, connect with leaders in the industry, and explore the incredible potential of this amazing material. We'll definitely be sharing what we learned at the event in future deep dives. But for now, let's step back and look at the big takeaways from our exploration of this week's biochar news. We started off by looking at that article that challenged the idea of classifying biochar as carbon dioxide removal.
Yeah, Dr. Pirard's point about additionality really made us think about how we measure the true climate impact of biochar production and how we can make sure we're putting our resources in the right place. It's a complex issue, but it definitely highlights how we need to be careful and precise when we talk about biochar's role in fighting climate change.
Then we shifted gears and looked at some research that showed how awesome it can be to use biochar and compost together in vineyards. The results were pretty amazing, both in terms of how much more fruit the vines produced and how much more profitable those vineyards became.
That study was a great example of how biochar can have these real, tangible benefits for farmers and the environment. It really showed how biochar can improve soil health, boost crop yields, and contribute to a more sustainable way of farming.
And of course, we spent some time talking about the International Biomass Conference and Expo, highlighting all the different biochar-related sessions and all the great opportunities to network, learn, and even get funding.
The conference definitely shows how biochar is becoming a bigger part of the broader conversation about sustainability. It's bringing together people from all over the world, experts, innovators, and investors, to explore how biochar can help us build a more sustainable future.
It's been a really interesting week in the world of biochar. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we're left with a question for you, our listeners. As the demand for sustainable solutions keeps growing, what role do you see biochar playing in our relationship with the environment?
It's a question that really makes you think beyond just the immediate ways we use biochar and consider how it could potentially change how we manage resources, how we produce food and energy, and ultimately how we create a future that's more sustainable and resilient.
We encourage you to check out the original articles on biochar today and share your thoughts and insights with us. We'd love to hear your perspectives on how biochar can help us shape a more sustainable world.
It's really cool to see how biochar is connecting the dots between like the hardcore science and the actual practical stuff people are doing. On the one hand, we've got these in-depth scientific conversations about how biochar stores carbon and whether it should be classified as CDR.
Right, and then on the other hand, we're seeing real-world results, like with that vineyard trial in California, where biochar is actually helping farmers grow more grapes and make more money.
Yeah, and that shows just how versatile biochar is. It has the potential to tackle a bunch of problems at the same time. It's not just some abstract idea, it's a real solution that's already making a difference out there.
And that's what makes this field so exciting. It's not just about theories and predictions. It's about making a real impact and creating positive change.
Absolutely. I think that's what really resonated with people this week. The stories that got the most attention weren't just about the science behind biochar, but how it's actually being used and how it could change industries and communities for the better.
That vineyard trial is a perfect example. It's a story that people can relate to. It's about improving people's lives, growing more food, and making our food systems more sustainable and resilient.
Yeah, and it's not just about agriculture. We're seeing people exploring how to use biochar in all sorts of areas, like cleaning up wastewater, making construction materials, and even generating renewable energy.
It seems like the possibilities are endless. That's what makes this field so dynamic and interesting. It's constantly changing, with new discoveries and innovations popping up all the time.
And that sense of discovery is what we've tried to capture in this deep dive. We've explored the latest news, research, and conversations happening in the biochar world, from the ins and outs of carbon accounting to how biochar can benefit farmers and the exciting potential of new technologies.
It's been a whirlwind tour of the world of biochar. We hope you found it as fascinating and thought-provoking as we have.
Definitely encourage everyone to check out the original articles from Biochar today and keep exploring this amazing material. It has so much potential to help us build a more sustainable future.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into biochar. We'll be back next week with more exciting news and discussions. Until then, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep that biochar conversation going.